therapist could be like, oh, it's an oral thing. And it's like, okay, it could be an oral thing, but it could also be a proprioception thing. Like we're trying to find our body in space. Child has a meltdown and it's a sensory meltdown. That calming is going to take a lot longer. Like I had a child that used to hum, and that was like something they were doing to regulate their body.
Have you ever wondered what an occupational therapist does? If you are a parent of someone who has ADHD or autism, or if you are working in early intervention and want to know why it might be important to actually get the number and collaborate with the occupational therapist, you will find benefit to this episode. If you're someone who is trying to understand what occupational therapy really is, I hope this brings you some insight. I highly recommend to listen to this episode, take notes, because we talk about executive functioning. We talk about sensory integration and how someone who has sensory sensitivities can demonstrate difficulties in other areas, again, impeding their progress. Today we're going to interview Samantha. She is the owner and founder of Lakeside SPOT. SPOT stands for Specialized Pediatric Occupational Therapy. And let's give it a go. All right, Sam, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi. Hi. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Samantha Holzschu. I started my own company. I'm an occupational therapist. I started my own company, Lakeside SPOT, in Chicago. It's Lakeside Specialized Pediatric Occupational Therapy. I love it. I work with kids. Natalie and I kind of bonded on that, and that's how we met. So I'm very excited to be here to kind of chat about it.
All right. Thank you for the introduction. I love that too. And when I was looking you up, I referred to Lakeside SPOT. I thought it was so smart to have that acronym together at the end.
Thank you. Yeah. It was a creative endeavor from both me and my fiance actually helped me with that name, and it stuck, and I loved the Lakeside piece of it because we're Lakeside here at Chicago, and it's just, I love it. So yeah.
Great. So do you want to get into what drove you to occupational therapy in the first place?
Yes. Okay. That's a great question. I knew at a young age that I wanted to help people, as us in healthcare kind of are driven and know. So I went to Purdue for my undergrad, and I started off actually on a pre-PA track, physician's assistant. I quickly understood that I did not like blood. Blood was not my thing. So
nursing far away.
Like, what else is there out there that does not encounter blood on a daily basis? Then I observed at BDI Playhouse, which is there's an Orland Park location and a Naperville location. It's a pediatric clinic that has all services. I observed there, the PT there, because I was like, oh, I think I want to go PT route. And while I was observing the PT, I actually got to see aquatic therapy, which I love. Aquatic therapy is just a whole nother branch that I love. But that kind of like is where my introduction in the peds world of therapy started. So I was observing the PT, and then she's like, why don't you go do some hours with the OT and see what they're doing? And I was like, okay. And so I went over to the OT and I was like, yes, I love this a lot. Like, this is amazing. I think this might be what I want to do. Like, I love the PT realm, but for me, I kind of also enjoy that like social emotional piece and like all encompassing. So I had that battle with myself of, am I going to go PT? Am I going to go OT? Switched majors at Purdue from the pre-PA track to movement and sport sciences to kind of give me a little bit more flexibility with that major. And then in that class, they told me I had to go observe a profession. And since I'd already observed PT, I said, well, let me go do OT in a different setting. And my great aunt was living in an assisted living facility at the time. So I went to observe OT there, and I instantly fell in love. I was like, just the fact that you can play games and incorporate those games, even with these older adults, like to work on all these skills, the fact that you're helping them with these self-care skills, all that stuff. I fell in love with it. So that kind of started me on the path into, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do. And then I got into OT school at my senior year of college at Western Michigan. And that's where I started. And I've loved it ever since. I'm very happy. It's my dream career. Everyone's like, do you love it? I'm like, I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else. So yeah.
And I resonate with that too. Coming from my background, I was like, wow, like I know I want to help people, but in what capacity and in what realm? And I know I looked at occupational therapy because I love like the psychology behind it, the cognition that's involved. I think people kind of like overlook like, oh, okay, you're helping them with like everyday activities, but
Mhm.
there's
Yeah.
so much more in the background that happens when your brain is like either like learning these skills for the first time or we're trying to rehab these.
Yeah, definitely. And I think speech and OT we overlap in so many ways, and even like in every setting. So pediatrics, yes, we overlap in a lot of ways, but also in like those older adult settings because of that cognition piece and how speech really is very driven in that cognition
Yeah.
piece. And then OT is also helping remedy those cognition pieces as well. So it's really cool that I don't know, I love speech as well as I'm a very big advocate of collaborating with any speech therapist
Yeah.
because I feel like I learn something new every time I talk to a speech therapist because it's a lot of things I don't know. So
And that's how I feel about occupational therapists because I will learn something about like, oh, like when we are like thinking about like sensory integration, we also want to like consider like proprioception. And I'm like, oh wow, I did not think that. And that
yeah,
could be a barrier in terms of learning language. And
yeah.
it was so funny when Samantha logged on. So I'm right now for the summer primarily early intervention, and she logged on. I'm like, yes, two early interventionists. And Samantha works more like throughout like just childhood.
So I'm under 18 right now. That's
Yeah,
like where I am. I did a field work in a SNF, like a skilled nursing
yeah.
facility when I was in grad school. I could get, but the peds kids have my heart. They always have. So that's where my heart lies.
All right. So you were gonna beat me to my next question.
Yeah.
So I was gonna ask, why did you choose peds over adults? I know some
Yeah.
people when they get in the field, they're like, wow, I knew I wanted to do pediatrics. I knew I wanted to do schools. But then you have some people that were like, I don't know, med or like
Yeah.
peds, home health. So how did you make that decision for yourself?
Yeah. So to go off of that, actually, when I was in grad school, I was like peds. I want to go peds. I went to grad school in Michigan. So when I was in Michigan, they were like, there's limited options for Chicago. And I was like, I want to go back to Chicago. I'm from Illinois. Like that is where I want to be. So my first week, they were like, okay, she wants to go to Chicago. Let's see how we can do it. And I was like, peds. Any peds setting that you can get me into, I will do it. I was like, I want to do every field work in peds. And they were like, okay, well, like you may not like peds after this. Like you don't know if that's what you want. And like I was like, okay, maybe not. Like we'll see. Like they were kind of like saying, open up your eyes and look at other things, which I did, and I learned so many other things in those settings. But the reason why peds was my jam and has always just been my thing. I started coaching kids in swimming when I was, I think, 12. I was like a junior coach for like 6 and unders.
So
And
that
I just
aquatic therapy was perfect. That's so
yes,
cool.
exactly. I was a swimmer and I played water polo all throughout college. So like that's just where I kind of that built that relationship with kids and really got to see like teaching kids and how that's super fun. And then also seeing the physical aspect of that and the developmental piece of their physical development while I'm coaching them year after year and seeing how they improve. And obviously it's a different setting because it's swimming, but it was just so that's kind of like I used to play. My mom always says, like, I literally played with baby dolls. That's all I ever played with. So it's like, it's kind of in my nature. The kids, the
Yeah.
pediatrics way has always just been what I've loved. And so then when I went to grad school, and then of course they were like, keep your eyes open and keep your mind open. And I was like, of course. And I did that. And I just remember it was during COVID when I went through field work. So that just was like a different environment in general. And my pediatric placement was just everything I loved. So at the SNF, I learned a lot. I'm very grateful for I did a hand therapy field work. I learned a lot in that.
Oh, wow.
I did a neuro field work. I learned a lot in that. So I got a lot of knowledge through those because they all encompass each other. You're an OT, you're comprehensive, but that peds, they just steal my heart. Their little smiles, all the developmental milestones, you see them reach so quickly and just helping them get there and helping parents just feel like everything is going to be okay when they maybe provided something that they're like, I don't know how to handle this, whether it's a diagnosis or something is going on. So that piece of it too is also just what I love.
I love that you added that too when it comes to like support. Something that we had in speech therapy is we have to like counsel families,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's like we're like you said, like tackling a new diagnosis, or we have like a skill set that we're not used to. It's not the traditional trajectory that you see all these milestones like, oh, wow, they should be there. And it's like, no, like sometimes kids, we have splinter skills. They might pick up different ones. They might be on a different timeline.
Yeah,
So
developmental milestones are they're not concrete. So that educating parents on that, and that, like, as you mentioned, like I just started in my business, Lakeside SPOT, doing parent coaching because I felt like that was an avenue that just is really needed, because those parents need that support and knowing, like, how do I support my child when maybe their sibling didn't develop the way that, like, developed a different way than they did? How can I support them and make sure that they're developing in the appropriate way that they should be? So that's another avenue too that I am really passionate about, and letting parents know that it's like, we can do this. We're a team. We've got this. We can do this together. And how can I support you to provide that? Because without the parent support, where would we be too?
Yeah. No, that's the thing too. And when it comes to early intervention, I like walk into sessions and I'm like, okay, I will give you notes after this, because the real magic happens outside of this 60-minute session.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
you
That
know,
collaboration piece. Mm-hmm.
right. And like you
Yeah.
said, too, parent coaching is such a huge, I think there's so much like that can be said about that service delivery model. Now, when it comes to occupational therapy, and this can be very broad, so start wherever you want. What do you typically see on your caseload? What does it look like? We talked about they're primarily peds. Do you have like neurotypical? Do you have a lot of like ASD?
Yeah. Great question. So it kind of looks different in every PEDS setting. There's a lot of different PEDS settings. I started off in like a therapeutic preschool therapeutic day program that had ADA connected to it. So my caseload was mainly ASD, that autism diagnosis. But now that I've started my own company, I've kind of been able to broaden the diagnoses I'm seeing. And that's partially the reason I went my own way, just to challenge myself in different ways too. I do see some clients still with that ASD diagnosis. I see some clients that also have potential ADHD diagnoses. They may be too young for it, but we're seeing those kind of characteristics of that hyperactivity. Social emotional concerns is something else that we get. A lot of times parents will come to us as OTs first before they'll go to like social work and psychology and all of that. And there's a fine line. Like, I work very closely with social work and psychology just because there is such a fine line there with that.
Yeah.
I also see diagnoses like dyslexia, dysgraphia, that kind of thing, because we work on handwriting and those fine motor skills that you need in order to complete handwriting and all of that. Other diagnoses such as like cerebral palsy. I had a few clients with that, which is a motor disorder. So working on like those gross motor, those fine motors, those skills. And then also executive functioning. I feel like that's something that's huge that I find the brain is just so interesting. And I bet you know this too. It's so complex. And so with those executive functioning skills, especially with kiddos with those ADHD diagnoses or ADD or any diagnoses such as that, they're having trouble in school and whatnot. Maybe completing homework, turning it in on time, knowing what the homework is, sitting still in class. All of those are executive functioning skills. So how do we provide support with them there too? And then, of course, our sensory processing friends. Those are friends that encompass, I feel like, all those diagnoses and then can also be on their own. So that's another fun one that I love too, because it's kind of sensory processing is, I'm sure we'll go more into it, but it's just such a fun, complex way of thinking. And you really have to approach every child that you meet that has maybe sensory processing and integration concerns, or just like they're processing things differently, or parents are concerned with their developmental milestones because of that, in a different way, because every person processes sensations in a different way. So yeah, and long story short, there's a lot of diagnoses and a lot of things we cover, but that's the basis basically.
No, thank you. And that covered a lot. For example, I know there's so much overlap, especially like in this modern day when it comes to executive functioning.
Yes.
So for me, that's kind of like new information, because like within the speech problem too, I'm like, how much isn't like within my scope of practice.
Yeah.
We then have like neuropsych that we also work with like an initial diagnosis of
Yep.
like EF. And then like, how do you typically work with executive functioning skills? Like, is it more making sure that you're maintaining just like your everyday tasks, or do you know if there's more like, I'm sure there's overlap with like sensory integration and like
Yes.
making sure that you
Yes.
have those under control so they can maintain attention in those settings.
Yes.
So if you
Yeah.
want to take the wheel on that
Yeah,
one.
yeah. Executive functioning is a very broad piece. You're totally correct with sensory processing is also directly linked. So I always tell when I get students, when I have fieldwork students that come and observe me or that I'm like doing fieldwork with, I tell them you always provide a sensory processing evaluation form to a parent, even if they're not presenting with concerns on sensory processing. The sensory processing could be something they're not fully aware of that's impacting other skills.
Okay.
So that's something I always do in every evaluation, just to allow it to kind of like get more information, especially because we may not see it in an evaluation. But back to executive functioning. We work on those skills. It depends. So I also started my company Lakeside SPOT because I was very passionate on meeting the child where that need was.
Yeah.
So whether that's in home, in school, I do offer virtual, but that's sometimes just not as applicable, because especially for those kids with those attention things, they can have a harder time over the telehealth, over the screen. But with the executive functioning, that's super key and super important, because when I wasn't doing that, I wasn't seeing the carryover of those skills into those environments. So the generalization and the carryover is so important. It's hard for a child to generalize those skills in an in-home setting when they're needing those skills in school. So bridging that gap and providing those services in those specific areas helps. Okay. So with executive functioning, if it's in a school setting, we're working on your working memory. So, okay, can we remember that we have these 5 tasks? And if we are having a hard time remembering that, what like techniques can we use to help us remember those working tasks? It could be time management. So how long do we know the difference between an hour versus 10 minutes? Or does 10 minutes feel like an hour, or does an hour feel like 10 minutes? So working on those skills and what we can do to help us kind of understand like that time management piece and that time piece. Those are like a few of them. There's plenty more. There's, obviously the problem solving piece. There's a bunch. Executive functioning is very broad, but we break down each of those skills that are in executive functioning and help build on those within that context of that child.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's great too. And throughout this so far, I really like how you look at the child holistically. But so something that I think is notable that you have this flexibility within Lakeside SPOT is, like you just said, I'm willing to go in the home or in the school. Mm-hmm. And we have a piece of generalizing across. And that's sometimes when I see parents and when I'm at my school during the school year, and I will say like, oh, like, how is little Johnny doing at home? And she'll say the polar opposite of what the teacher's saying. And so it's really trying to bridge that gap. And I think it's awesome that you're willing to do either. So how did you kind of get into like working within the school setting? Being like, I know you have more of a background in like outpatient, ASD, and just working to expand.
Yeah. So at my first job, when I was at that therapeutic preschool and kindergarten, I also did in school and in homes there as well, just not as frequently. And then the reason why I went this route of that child needs to be seen in the setting that they're seen in is because like I said before, I was seeing kids in the clinic and I was doing executive functioning games and activities to really work on those skills. And yes, they were helpful, but they weren't as helpful as they could be. And I was seeing kids in the clinic, or I was seeing them at home, and teachers were saying, hey, I was like, I don't see any of that at home. Like you're saying, I don't see these attention things. I don't see anything that you're mentioning at home. And teachers are contacting me being like, no, like we need assistance in school. Like we're having a hard time focusing in class. We can't sit in circle time. Like, what do you do? How can you help me? And it's like, well, I can't be there to see that. So like, that's kind of where that piece I felt like was disconnecting.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I got into the in-school and in-home piece as well. And also just being able to provide resources that are feasible for parents, because not every family can have a sensory gym, although that would be amazing.
Yeah,
I
in
wish
a
I had
perfect
sensory
world.
gym for myself. Like, it would be amazing, but that's not always feasible. So what things can I bring in to introduce parents that they can use on the go if that's something that they need? If they can use it, a quick thing that's not maybe taking up a massive amount of space, but a quick way to work on a heavy work or a proprioception or a vestibular skill to work on those sensory pieces. That's not this huge equipment that may only be available 1 day a week too. So grand scheme, that's kind of how we encompassed back into the in-school and in-home too.
Okay. So
Yeah.
this might be broad and you could completely tell me so, but what kind of like tools and resources do you typically give? And we'll start with like teachers. What can like a teacher listening to this be able to take and apply to their classroom for the upcoming school year?
Yeah. I would say every child benefits from structure of some sort. That's something that I always encourage teachers with. Knowing the daily schedule and having that on the wall as a visual is huge. Even if a child knows the routine, seeing it as a visual for them is more helpful, because obviously as teachers, things change and every day is not the same. So it's like, okay, how can I provide that support for my student without without them having maybe a huge meltdown because something changes? And that visual and going over that visual, those are like big things that help those kind of social, emotional, and sensory regulation and self-regulation pieces in a very simple way where the teacher's not having to target that specific child. Another thing is hallway breaks. I'm sure they're very familiar with these, and I know it's so hard to do these, but even providing like different strategies or visuals in class, like animal walks, cards, or breath work, or that kind of thing that kids can do while they're in class, hand squeezes, different heavy work that can be done while they're there so they don't have to take them out for hallway breaks is another option. Even like transitioning between classroom to maybe the gym, if it's for they're going to gym class, using your transitions to kind of help provide that heavy work is another way to do it. If you have a child that's a little bit more excited and happy and has a hard time like sitting and focusing, and maybe in the line they're touching their friend in front of them, they're touching the wall, they're leaning on the wall, they're running, they're doing all the things to get their body some movement. So using the transitions to help them with that heavy work they're carrying, whatever they need to carry. Maybe it's your bin or your backpack that you're carrying from one room to the other. You're giving it to that child, so you're giving them that heavy work in a functional way. And the biggest thing, and I know teachers know this, but when you have a child that has sensory processing difficulties or differences, or they have those attention differences and they need that support, singling them out and having them do activities by themselves is going to impact their self-image, because they're going to think that they're looked at differently. So I always encourage teachers, if you can do this as a group, that child's going to be way more willing to do it than saying, hey, you, Joe, go over there in the corner and do some breath work. They're going to say, why do I need to do that?
Why just me?
So like, why just me? So even if you can't have the whole group do it, have them pick a friend and then they can go do it with their friend, even if the friend doesn't need that activity or that work. So those are some like basic skills that I always encourage teachers to do, just so that I know it's a crazy environment. We talked about this recently, how in the school sometimes it's like nothing, like you don't have time as a teacher. And I give so much respect to teachers, because I could not imagine being in a room with 20 kids and then having a few kids that just need that extra support. And also just collaborating. I mean, having them collaborate with an OT, even if it's bringing an OT in to consult with them and being like, okay, this is what I'm seeing, and having them communicate with that OT and being like, that's not feasible for me. Like, I need something that I can do quick, and this is not a quick thing I can do. Can you give me another idea? Because OTs, we have creative, crazy brains where we are thinking up of anything we possibly can to help that child in that situation. So I guarantee you there's something.
I will tell parents, too, especially like in the early intervention setting. I'm like, let me know if the strategy is not feasible for you and your family, because I'd rather something be done
Yeah.
than nothing.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's really, again, like you said, and I can echo this throughout this whole conversation, like meeting the child where they're at.
Uh-huh. Yep, exactly. And like, I mean, even in the home, like you're saying, everyone's routine is different. So if you're saying, hey, at dinner every night, can you make sure that you're, I don't know, having them, I'm saying a speech thing, you can totally say them, having them pronounce everything on the table and like having them work on their speech sounds that way. But then the parent says, well, we actually don't eat dinner together.
Yeah,
It's
that's
like
really good.
understanding like, okay, like how do I adapt this so it works for you? So yes, I agree. Meeting the child exactly where they are is a perfect skill to have too. And teachers, all teachers know that.
All teachers know that. And
Yes.
like you said, I got to give credit where it's due,
Yes.
because teachers like you guys inspire me.
Yes, me too.
Having to be so hands-on and like talk about working memory, having to think about each and every student and prioritizing those needs. So I think everything that you provided, that was excellent. What would you say either to a teacher or to a parent when it comes to some red flags? And we could break it down to like sensory components or like anything with fine motor.
Yeah. Yeah. Like red flags of like, oh, they should be seen by an OT is
Yeah.
what you're, yeah. Let's break it by components because it's so comprehensive. But I would say sensory, anything that's impeding a routine. So for parents, if you're getting dressed in the morning and the child refuses to wear any shorts, refuses to wear any socks, and it's maybe summertime, it's hot, and that child's like, I don't want shorts. I don't want them. I don't want them. I don't want them. The goal is not to get the child to wear shorts. It's to understand why that child is feeling like they need the pants and why that's the piece that needs to be done. Okay. That's impacting our routine. It's impacting our overall health and safety because they could overheat if they are going outside. And it's also taking them away from activities like maybe they can't play outside because they're in these heavy pants and they get hot really quick, or they can't play as frequently as they want. Yeah. That's like a sensory example, I feel like. Another one would be we're rocking while we're in circle time because we're kind of seeking that vestibular input. I'm thinking like of a school example, that rocking piece, or rocking in our chair, or falling out of our chair. That could be another one. That could be a sensory piece. That could also be a core strength, gross motor piece. We don't have the strength to keep us up in the chair, so we're falling out all the time.
That's a really good piece, especially for like our CP kids.
Yes.
Cerebral palsy and
and we're almost, I would say, seeing a little bit more of that from COVID being a hard thing too. That wasn't seen as often, and also with kind of developmental milestones changing, of course, with like the crawling aspect being removed and all of that. That core strength piece is really being impacted. So we're seeing a lot of that, like of kids falling out of their chairs and teachers are like, what's going on? It's like, it's a strength piece. Like it's also probably a sensory piece because they are trying to get some input, but there's another reason behind it too. Yeah. And from the speech aspect, like that core strength has it's a core part of our body.
It's respiratory. It is like what feeds our voice. And even I think about like feeding kiddos too. That piece is so important. And that could be causing hindering that progress.
Yeah, exactly. And providing like positional supports just to help that is like huge and an easy way to help them build that core strength, working on that core strength with the strengthening exercises, but then also helping them, meeting them where they're at and providing them with those positional like strategies too. Other red flags would be too, like attention. If attention's really hard, I always tell parents 2 times your age is how long you should be able to attend. So if your child is 3, they should be able to attend to 3 to 6 minutes. If you're starting to see that they're having a really hard time attending for like even a minute, that's when I'd be like, okay, let's get us in because maybe we need some input to help us calm our body, help us regulate our body, and then we can attend for longer because our sensory system's a little bit out of whack too. So that 2 times or that like 2 times your age rule is what I always tell parents to help the math too of that. And help like, okay, there's something going on here, like that we should get checked out a little bit more, or nah, he's just developing the way he is. He can attend for 3 minutes. Like he just doesn't like this activity. Those things too. Fine motor would be the grasp development. What I can do, Natalie, too, if you have like a little bio or like something for this podcast, I can provide you resources on all of this.
That's perfect.
Parents and teachers.
I was going to add your information on there too for the bio.
Perfect.
So that would be excellent.
Yeah. So those are things. And then also like that visual motor piece is the developmental milestones with letters and shapes, our ability to do puzzles. We have a hard time doing puzzles. If we have a hard time doing buttons and fasteners, that could be a fine motor hand strength piece. Cutting with scissors, that could also be a visual motor hand strength piece.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of components. That's why I'm always like, I offer free screens, because even for parents like not sure, it's always good to get it. Like, we'll do a check, we'll see how things are going. And if I find one thing in those areas that I'm like, this could warrant further evaluation, then it's like, let's have a discussion and talk about this skill too. So yeah.
Okay. Wow. That was really helpful. I think that's the thing with like occupational therapy and speech. I feel like you could like hone in a little bit more.
Yeah.
But with occupational therapy, there is such a big umbrella of what you guys cover. And I was taking notes as you were talking. And yeah, there's just like a lot to cover. Something that came to my mind that when you were saying this though, is what would you say is the difference between a meltdown or a kid just being upset? I think that's a big question that I hear parents like bring up in like a Reddit forum or will ask me.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like a sensory meltdown versus like just a kind of like a tantrum in a way. Yes. I always tell parents it's based on how quickly they can calm.
Okay.
So if a child has a meltdown and it's a sensory meltdown, that calming is going to take a lot longer.
Okay.
If we're tantruming, it's going to be in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. So we're like, because we're not getting the thing we want, the thing we need, the thing we're asking for. Okay. So if it's a sensory meltdown over, let's say, ice cream, it might look like kind of start off like a tantrum, but then it continues on even after we're given the ice cream. Let's say like, okay, you know what? I don't have time. I don't have patience to deal with this tantrum right now. Here's your ice cream. That child will still be melting down because there's more components to it. Because maybe we're really hot and we don't know how to communicate that that's a piece. So we're having this meltdown because we can't regulate our body temperature. Maybe it's the tag on our shirt is itchy and we can't communicate that. So it's just like, I'm going to cry and melt down because I need this fixed, but I don't know how to communicate that. So that's kind of what a sensory meltdown would look like. A tantrum is more so the piece of I'm going to tantrum because I don't want this ice cream cone. I'm giving it, and I'm immediately done tantruming because I got what I want.
That is such a good picture to paint for a parent. So thank you for explaining that. That is perfect.
Yeah. And I think two piece of it is with OT, something that I always incorporate, even if it's a sensory meltdown or a tantrum, is those self-regulation strategies. That's a big piece that OT kind of starts with before maybe if it's a bigger concern, I'll recommend out to social work. Okay. But if we're seeing those big tantrums and those big feelings, how can we provide those strategies to that child to self-regulate? I mean, they're not supposed to self-regulate. I was told this to parents too, developmentally until 7, but how can we as parents support them to be able to use those strategies too?
I like that addition where it's like, okay, developmentally, like we're still working on that. We're not there yet, especially if it's like a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
But there's so much power in like a parent even just modeling those techniques within themselves. So what would be a couple different like self-regulation techniques that you would provide?
Yeah.
And again, it probably varies by the kid.
It does. It does. But there are a lot of good ones that are really quick and easy. Deep breaths are a really big one. So pizza breath, there's a bunch of different ones that you can find online, like deep breath strategies. Pizza breath is a really good one. Like you're smelling your pizza and then you're cooling it down by breathing out.
I've never heard that one. I love that.
Yes, that's like one of my favorite ones. Or you're blowing out candles on a birthday cake. You hold your finger up, it's a candle, and then you're blowing it. Or even like rainbow breaths are a big one where you bring your hands up, you take a big deep breath in, and then you draw a rainbow when you're coming back out. That's another one too. Yeah. Yeah. So, because it's also got some movement in it. So those kids are like, oh, like they're kind of like, it's more of a buy-in too, because it's fun. Another one is too, I do with my boys, I think I call them dinosaur breaths or monster breaths, or no, breathe in and then we roar when we breathe out. It's like, because we're really letting
one
that
more
out.
time, because you
Sorry.
cut it out. One more
Did
time.
I freeze?
Yes.
Lion breaths. So you breathe in and then you go, and you breathe out. All kids are like, love it. And then they're like, how loud can I be? And I'm like, are we getting more dysregulated or is this helping? So that's a fun one.
Like a fun one. Oh,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
and some other ones are like hand squeezes. If we really just need something, like when we're sitting in the car, squeezing our hands for 10 seconds and counting to 10. Counting to 10 by itself is another one that we can use too. Hugs are really good because that's that immediate heavy work proprioceptive input from a parent. Even if they're tantruming and they will allow you to, giving them a hug to help them know that they're feeling safe so that they can co-regulate. Because that's something too that's big. If we're having a tantrum, they're going to need that regulation, feeling, and strategy from that parent with that co-regulation piece too.
I really appreciate that piece. I was just reading a book on like polyvagal theory.
Yeah.
And how co-regulation too, like those mirror neurons will pick it up from like that parent. And I think that's such like an important piece. I will tell like parents like about like squeezes.
Yeah.
Squeezes are huge. And then how that could give like those kids like a little like proprioceptive information.
Yeah.
I always say like consult your occupational therapist. But this is based off the report that I saw. I think it can help. And when they are dysregulated and a parent will turn to me like, wow, that did really work. Or if we will even do like a like game that we're trying to target a certain word.
Yeah.
And once they get those hugs or squeezes, like that kind of unlocks a piece of the puzzle because they're provided with that sensory information.
Yeah, because they're probably so overstimulated that providing that deep pressure is kind of centering us and helping us organize our sensory system so we can sit and focus more too. So that's great that you're doing that.
Do we dare conquer the sensory piece now?
We totally can.
All right. So there are so many different like avenues, as like you, the listener, have heard. Samantha's talked about like proprioceptive, vestibular, and Samantha, I'm going to let you take the wheel.
Yeah.
You want to begin?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with basic education of sensory system. There's 5 that we're familiar with, which is our taste, our smell, our sight, our hearing, and our touch. Those are the 5 that we're all familiar with. And then there's 3 that are with the sensory integration that we also work on, which is that proprioception, which I also call heavy work. Heavy work and proprioception are very similar, very same. They are the same. You do heavy work to provide proprioception. So it's kind of like the layman's term for proprioception in a way. Vestibular is also one too. Vestibular is our like sense of head movement in space. So that spinning, that it's like that inner ear piece is where that vestibular system really is. So spinning, jumping, like going upside down, inverting your body. That's that vestibular system. And interoception is that final sense that's kind of, I feel like it's the most controversial, but it's also the most beneficial to know about.
Okay.
Interoception is what's going on inside your body. It's knowing those cues, that hunger cue, that when I have to go to the bathroom, that cue. Body temperature cue. Do I know when I'm really hot? Do I know when I'm really cold? Those types of things. So that's kind of like your hidden sense is what it's called. I am a strong believer that all of your sensory systems impact that interoception piece. So how do we really tap in and understand which sensory system is being impacted at that time? And how can we provide strategies to support that child with their sensory needs in all of those sensory systems at the same time? Okay. And it's kind of like one of those things where a child may be showing some, like maybe they're humming. Like I had a child that used to hum, and that was like something they were doing to regulate their body. Was we would sit and do something, and I would see humming.
They
And
caught that on their own?
yeah, just like like that kind, just humming.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, they're regulating their bodies. This is fine in our OT session because it's not impacting anything we're doing. They can hear us. It's fine. Like I'm totally fine with this. But in a classroom setting, that's when it can be distracting. So why are we humming? What's the reason behind this? And so I'm thinking in my head, okay, well, are we auditory? Like, are we overstimulated? That could be it. We're kind of like trying to find our place in space by humming. Like that's our way of regulating ourselves. But then also there's a tactile piece and like an oral piece that we can feel with that sensation of the humming. So is that also it? So in that scenario, I'm providing headphones because, okay, if I put headphones on, does that decrease that humming? Because that's helping the auditory input. Like, is that giving us the input that we need to help decrease that in a classroom setting? Okay, no, that doesn't work. Do I give a Z vibe or something that vibrates to give us that humming, kind of that vibration that humming will give us in a more functional way in a classroom? Sorry, I'm doing this because of Z vibe.
Yes, like it's
I'm
right
not doing this, but you know,
right below her mouth.
yeah, like putting in our mouth,
listening.
going back and forth, because that's giving us that input that humming would give.
Okay.
So that's why I love OT, is because one thing could immediately be like, parents or another therapist could be like, oh, it's an oral thing. And it's like, okay, it could be an oral thing, but it could also be a proprioception thing. Like we're trying to find our body in space, and it's our way of doing that. And orally we're seeking these things, but it all could also be like, how is our body position while we're seeking these? Like, are we seeking vestibular input because we like have our head inverted while we're like chewing on something? So there's so many different components to it. And that's why I love OT, because we have the education and the knowledge to look at all of those components at that child and identify like what area we really need to see if we can tap into too.
I'm almost jealous that you get to like uncover a piece of the puzzle, and like each individual kid is like truly a case study.
Yeah.
Where you have to consider all aspects. And like you said, like the humming, you have the knowledge and the bandwidth to like look at like, okay, because some kids like maybe could be auditory.
Yeah.
Like you said, like the tactile. There's also like the vagus nerve there, right, too. So like that could be another piece where it's like, oh, are they just like figuring out how to like self-soothe in this way? And there's just so many different considerations. So and like one that comes to mind, I just saw a kid and I'm like, has she seen her OT yet? Before I say anything, that's when I called. I'm like, when we last spoke, I was like, I feel like I need you. So I have this little girl. She is 2'5", so I'm doing math in my head. She's 2 years, 2.5. And so, well, okay, besides the point, math.
Yeah.
She's covering her ears. And immediately I was like, okay, so how was she for the 4th of July? How was she like during these like parties? And mom's like, oh, like she does that too. Like she does it when she doesn't want to participate. And I'm like, I think there's something more than this.
Yeah.
And my mind immediately went to that like auditory processing. So that hearing sense that like Samantha mentioned, like one of the 5 that we know.
Yeah.
And so like, can you attest to that? Like, this is something that we see, like, you know?
Yes. Yeah, that is definitely something we see. I think if I have a parent that's what we're seeing, I immediately say, okay, let's go get checked out by a hearing doctor, see if there's anything going on, just to check all your bases. Then I would invert them, put them upside down, see how they react. Ooh. Because if they immediately are like, get me out of this, okay, is there some inner ear situation going on that's causing us to be hyper fixated on like those sounds, which is impacting us?
Wow.
Yeah, like that's something that I would do immediately, just to see like, okay, is there more to this than just this? And it could just be, okay, this sounds really loud, this is what I want to do. And that's a great self-regulation strategy that child knows at such a young age, that like I can do this and it calms me down. I would also, like, as a speech therapist, see how our see how our language changes if she's speaking, like her language and how her inflection of her voice changes, because that could be also like an oral, almost like, I don't know, like an auditory oral thing, like because if you think about it with headphones on, your voice changes in your ears.
Yeah, because you have that tactile.
Yes. So that could be a piece of it too. It's always a mystery. It's like, that's what I always tell parents, like a sensory, I hate to say sensory diet, but like a sensory diet is what it's called. Those are so ebb and flowing and changing because a child changes and their regulation needs change on a daily basis. And it's okay, how can we provide the support that's best for them? Because it's not a one fits all type of situation either. So yeah.
Especially like when we're still reaching these developmental milestones. So this little girl has 5 real words.
Yeah.
So we're still working on building that. And then, so once we get more, I'll look at that inflection, but she's very like short, very like, CP, like, or VC, like type of words, like consonant and vowel pairing. So I'll have to look at that next time. Thank you.
Or even spinning her and seeing that vestibular input is another fun way to be like, oh, like, and if she's kind of like, whoa, like that was a lot, then being like, oh, or if she immediately goes like this to like kind of help center her brain, her like, I say her brain, but like her head and her ears and all of that, that could also be indicating that there's something else going on too.
Oh, wow. Okay. So for whoever's listening, if you just saw what happened, so Samantha, I like, okay, this covering of the ears, I'm like, my mind immediately went to like auditory processing. And that's also partially because vestibular isn't really covered with learn about the inner ear.
Yeah.
But see here, this was like a misconception where I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure it's from hearing. So what other like misconceptions do you see a lot of, if you see?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It's like I said, I wouldn't say misconceptions. I feel like it's innate to be like, this is the first thing that I'm gonna address. One thing that I always encourage parents is like, we don't want to take that away. We don't want to impact them so that they don't have, because a lot of like, sometimes these things could also be self-regulating, like you were saying, like the humming could be a self-regulating strategy. I don't want to ever take that away, because if you're feeling like you need that self-regulation strategy, I'm never going to take that away, because that's what's regulating your body. But if that's what's giving you self-regulation, how can we provide that regulation in a different way to help you learn? And that could be heavy work. That could be our body is just disorganized and we need more heavy work. And the more heavy work we have, the less humming we see, because our body's being organized. So it's like this, it's a very, like I said, it's complex. You said, do we want to open this can of worms? It's a very complex, like, can of worms that you're constantly building on and growing on. So there really are no misconceptions. It's just, how do we can provide those base strategies like the headphones and chewies and all that. But is that the basis of the problem? Is that the only thing that's helping? Or is there more to it that we need to explore and understand too?
And I like how you added, like, within this realm, can of worms, that's where this collaboration piece also comes into, because I'm assuming you probably talk to like audiologists where it does like address that vestibular component, and like inner ear specialists. I know me personally, I had a really bad concussion, and so I had vestibular issues. I had like, I don't know the real term, but like vertigo. PPV. And I saw a specialist solely to just walk in a straight line. And like, there are so many different domains that cover these, and it's like, truly, you're like the artist trying to, or like, what's the word, like trying to like conduct all the different like moving parts within it.
And it's funny that you say that, because concussions too, that's something that OTs will work in. Like they will work as post concussion OTs. Like they're out there that work on the vestibular system and how to help with the vision piece of it, because that's such a component, that the visual, the inner ear, all of that is so connected.
I probably needed you guys. I always say that. I like told them there, I was like, I need you. Oh man. I love it. I want to get back into those interoceptive. That is a piece that I haven't heard much about. And I don't know like any like I'm sure that there's more research that has came out since I was in grad school. Like I
Yeah.
graduated a few years ago. So
Yeah.
if you want to begin too.
Yeah. So it's like it's definitely it's become a very large piece of this class. I don't know how long, but like recently. It's been like relatively recently. It's been more talked about. The interoception piece is that piece, like I said, those cues. So a lot of the kids that I see in ASD too, we can see that we have a hard time with any cues of our body. And so we see those, especially if we have a hard time communicating. We may not be able to say like we're hungry. And so it might come out in a way of, what'd you say?
It's like I hungry or like, or I need to go to the bathroom. Like
Yes. Yeah.
something of
And
that.
we don't have the words to say that. So we might see like the links with aggression with that if we see some increased aggression, but that's an interoception piece. So how do we have that child understand that that is a hunger cue telling you that you're hungry? How do we have them? And obviously that's where I work closely with speech, because especially with those children that are not able to communicate that yet, how do we provide them with the words or the way to be able to communicate with that?
Yeah, like baby signs, or even like
Yes.
using like some sort of like PACS or
Yeah.
like AAC device, like having
Yeah.
them select I'm hungry on
Yes.
a device.
Yes, I
Wow.
love AACO devices. I just think they're amazing.
I think
But
that's so cool. I
yeah,
love when I get like an EI kid that has ASD and I'm like, all right, let's do it. Let's bring it in.
yes, they're just that communication piece is always just such a that's why I love collaborating with you guys, because I'm like, as soon as we get those kids a way to communicate, we see so many other avenues open up. And then we can tap into these sensory systems and all that. But anyways, I go off on tangents. Can you tell? But so yeah, interoception just kind of like, so as an OT, we have a whole system. Her name's Kelly Mahler. I'm going to double check that I'm telling you that right. Yes, Kelly Mahler. She is the interoception queen. She's an OT that kind of dove more in, does more research with this. She has a curriculum based on it. So with it, you kind of go through the steps, you go through every sensation, and you talk about every body part, and you explore the sensation in every body part to really hone in on those interoception skills, to really help build those pieces. So I have had some kids who have had a hard time with the bathroom. Like they may be able to go one way, but not the other way. And how do we work on tapping in and understanding, like, I'm having an accident right now. Like that's what this is, because they may not even feel themselves having accidents. And that's an interoception piece. So how do we hone into like what that feels like? And so we talk a lot about, okay, well, when my belly cramps up, or when like, I don't know, I can't think of things off the top of my head right now, but like when my belly cramps up or any of that, like, oh, that's a sign that I might need to use the bathroom. And so like talking about and exploring those sensations too in the inner body are great ways to work on it.
And there's so often that I'll read a document or like a report where I'll see like has trouble communicating when they have to go to the bathroom. And so that's a cue too. And I see it a lot in those kids that do present with like red flags for autism.
Yeah.
I think that's a really big component. And like I'll teach like family members like the sign for like potty.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you work with this too, but like kind of even mapping out the day, like does he usually go number 2 like right after like a big meal, or directly in the morning, even catching that right before? So wow, I didn't even know that was its own sensory component in itself.
And we actually do see it too in ADHD as well, and like ADD and kind of like all those other types of attention and executive functioning processing too, because it's like it is an EF skill, because it's a very complex skill to really understand, and a lot of us it comes naturally, like we know those cues, but for some kids it's harder. So really just teaching us what strategies can we use to really hone in on those so that we're more independent in understanding what those cues are too.
No, when I like paint all like put the puzzle together, it's like OT, it's like really we're uncovering like activities of daily living.
Yep, totally.
And so you're giving that key to these individuals to really make the most of their like everyday lives.
Yep.
And I'm sure we can go in on like even more with like sensory information. But I wanted, since we're coming up on an hour now,
Yeah.
so I wanted to give you the time. Do you think that there's anything that you would want parents to take away from this conversation today or that you would like to add?
Yeah. So I think the best thing I can add is that there is, first of all, if your child is referred to services, there's nothing wrong with your child. They are who they are. And as an OT and as a service provider, Natalie would know, we are not there to change your child. We're there to help your child be the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's never too early and it's never too late to go and seek services. So if you have questions and you're like, I'm not sure about this, or maybe like you're looking at their hand grasp and you're like, that doesn't look appropriate to me. And they're 3. It's like, it's never too early because yes, they're maybe not writing their name now, but we can work on those skills so that when they do approach writing their name, they can get there and they're not having any trouble with it. So like, that's something that I always like to encourage parents to know is that it's never too early. It's never too late. And also feel free to reach out at any point. If anybody, I want to encourage parents to like, OT is complex. Speech, I feel like can also be complex because you guys do address other areas besides just speech, like speech sounds. Like you can address executive functioning in a way and all that stuff, AAC, and like there's a lot of components. So I always say reach out because Google sometimes does not provide the best answers, and talking to a professional about what you can provide and what those services are can kind of open up those doors too for parents as well.
Yes. And something that echoed throughout this, but each child is different.
Yes.
Like speech and like in speech and language, our domain, we're like, okay, let's provide the most individualized plan of care. And I think that's even like tenfold with occupational therapy, where each kid, some kids may love like having Play-Doh in their hands and like get that tactile information, where some kids can't stand anything sticky. Get that away.
Yeah.
So when you're reading stuff online, parents, like there's not like a cookie cutter one size fits all. So I encourage like Samantha, if you want to say how they could reach you or even find your website, I can link it down below too. But any other like Instagram or like email too.
Yes. So I have a website, lakesidespot.com, that has all my information, payment information. You can an intake document that you can fill out, then it will go straight to my email. If it's a direct question and you want to reach out to me via email, Samantha@lakesidespot.com is my email. We do have an Instagram. I would like to post on it way more frequently than I do, and I'm hoping in the fall that's something I will do. But Lakeside Spot is the Instagram name as well, and we do have a Facebook page too. So yeah, feel free to reach out. And like I said, even if it's just a simple information question, I'm always happy to help, and I just want to support parents in any way I can. So yeah.
All right, and since I do have this pulled up, I'm going to give you a special little shout out. So Sam is Samantha. Sorry, I've been calling you Sam. And
no,
Samantha.
That's okay. You're good.
I have like 5 best friends. I have like 5 friends named Sam. So
that's okay. I respond to both.
She's the co-chair of the Sensory Integration and Processing SIS for the Illinois Occupational Therapy Board. So feel free to. Do you have any like workshops or like education that like you've done in the past or like that you offer?
Yeah. So right now I'm starting on the parent coaching journey too with my company, but we do at Illinois Occupational Therapy Association, we have a page, and as co-chair, we provide resources and education on the sensory systems on the website. So if you go to the Illinois Occupational Therapy Association website, there's resources there. We're going to be doing like a continuing educational piece too for therapists. So any other OTs that are looking, or speech therapists too, come on out and like you guys can join and kind of get some more information on I think our next one is sensory system and then the ASD diagnosis and like how those incorporate and interact with each other. But yeah, we meet and we do journal clubs with research too every 3 months to talk about like updated research and what that looks like, since the sensory systems and sensory integration and processing is such a diverse thing. So that's something we do too. And yeah, I'm hoping in the fall to do kind of like a virtual parent education course just to educate more people on OT, because that's
Yes.
I feel like part of my calling as well. I just love our profession and I want everyone to know about it. So
I know,
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that too. And
Yeah.
like, thank you so much for this time, because, you know, I try to like cover like all the bases of like, okay, like there's another speech therapist that focuses primarily on like ASD, or like
Yeah.
there's another speech therapist that's like on burnout education, or but I feel like for OT, there's so much to learn, and you've even kind of paved more the way for information for me
Yeah.
in this session. So this interview. So thank you so much for coming on. I like even took notes too. So I'm excited to share this with parents, teachers, other clinicians. So
Me too.
you're
Thank
doing
you for having me.
yeah, you're doing your life's purpose. You're sharing it.
I
So
know. And I think I'm grateful we met, because I think we together as a team can really just help as well as many parents. So thank you for having me on. It's been a joy.
of course, of course.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of My Clarity Therapy. I really enjoyed recording this, and Samantha is awesome. If you are in the Chicagoland area and interested in pursuing services with her, I have the link down below. It is lakesidespot.com, and she also has Instagram, trying to work out. So don't mind thundering. We will see you next time.